Doctors of Reddit, what was the most shocking case of I thought that was normal you've seen in a patient? Patient here. I spent the majority of my life thinking it was normal to lose muscle control when laughing really hard or scared. I used to tell my friends to stop making me laugh in high school while I was taking notes since I couldn't hold the pencil anymore. Turns out I have cataplexy, which is a weird sleep disorder that causes it. Apparently falling over when someone startles you is not something everyone experiences. My friend is being told that vomiting blood during pregnancy is normal and doc gives her a med and tells her to go home. Same with some other freaky symptoms. I've never heard of that. I think she needs a new obgyn. Good god yes. Get a new doctor. Vomiting blood is never normal. Not a doctor, but I went to visit a friend of mine whom I hadn't seen in over a year. 6 feet 4 inches buff dude who ran 10 miles a day had dropped to 135 pounds and I dragged him into the hospital after he said he was having trouble with keeping food in his system for very long and thought it was normal because he'd always had some digestive issues. Ulcerative colitis, lost a massive chunk of his gut, was on IV nutrition for months, and had to be very carefully monitored because he also ended up with a nasty case of refeeding syndrome. Dentist here. Did scaling of a patient and these huge chunks of calculus came out, and this patient proceeded to say that a dentist from the endodontics department referred him here for scaling that he didn't need. I showed him the chunks of calculus and this patient replies with, "Oh, I thought this stuff was there to strengthen my teeth." My older sister had a tick in her leg for 4 months. I noticed it at one point because she had drawn doodles around it with a pen. She was an adult at the time. These stories are actually a dime a dozen. It's kind of baffling. Admitted a guy last week who came to the ED with chief complaint of some right-sided numbness for last few days, presumably had a stroke. Turns out he also had a rapidly progressing gangrenous infection of his scrotum thighs perirectal areas which required emergency surgery. He wouldn't have even sought out medical attention if it wasn't for his stroke. Also had a patient not even mention that he had been paralyzed from the waist down for the last week, which was new for him. Never even mentioned it. Did complain about his nausea though. As a patient, some of these are on me, some are on the medical professionals, but pretty understandable. Some both. Went in for ongoing issues with generally feeling unwell. Doc said I probably had pneumonia, and when I asked about my toe hurting he said, "Probably just broken. Nothing we can do." Next morning my leg was 3x its normal size and I went into septic shock and had a seizure. They never figured out the pathogen, but I had cellulitis in my leg. In spite of being in the hospital a week, I still had no idea anything serious had happened. Never heard of sepsis except regarding menstruation, until a doctor came in, looked at my leg and said, "I don't think we'll have to amputate anything." Afterwards, learning the drugs they gave me, I realized I had come pretty close to dying. Another time I started hallucinating while totally sober and in fine health. I thought it was a little funny but no big deal. Once it stopped I was sort of on the fence on whether to do anything, so I called my parents' doctor's office and spoke to the nurse. She said I should probably go in just to be safe. I really didn't want to deal with the costs. She asked if I had anything else wrong. I kinda laughed and said, "Nah, I mean I woke up with a sore neck, but that's life." She told me to go immediately to the ER. I had had a stroke. One other time I got food poisoning. I'd never had serious food poisoning before, but my boss who I was at a conference with had. After clearing myself completely in a very short period of time, I told her I would probably miss the next day. She asked if I needed anything. I said, "No number. I'm just trying to drink water but I can't keep it down. I've put all my pillows on the bathroom floor so I can stay close to the toilet." She brought me ginger tea and asked if they could take me to the hospital. I declined and tried the tea, which also came back up. I was still heaving and got to the point I could hardly get up, so I let her and a co-worker drive me to the hospital, but I felt so stupid. Who goes to the ER for food poisoning? They stabilized me in the ER after a few hours and ran some tests. They told me then I could go home if I wanted, or stay the night in the hospital if I preferred. If you can't tell, I'm really the sort to not worry about health and assume things will be fine. But some instinct told me to stay. I felt like crap when they wheeled me over to the hospital and I told them that. Next thing I remember, I was on a hospital bed surrounded by med staff. I had a seizure. Fremulin. As a patient, I've always had headaches, almost daily. About 10 years ago, I started seeing weird auras that would take up my whole vision, and then get a terrible headache that made me want to die. Maybe once a year that would happen. About 3 years ago, we got really good insurance. Then I got several auras right in a row, and I start to worry it's a detached retina or something. So I go and see an ophthalmologist, who dilated my eyes and looked around. He suggested I see a neurologist, and maybe they'll do an MRI. Meanwhile, I had a stomachache that lasted a few days. Very odd for me, since I don't really get them. But it woke me up in the middle of the night one day, and I had another aura visual, but no headache. Saw the neurologist a week later, and boy did he like talking about how fat I was. I had 3 kids and their years. I'm squishy, not morbidly obese with little motion. Deal with it. They were able to get me in for the MRI that day, and despite being claustrophobic, it wasn't terrible. I walked out to the parking lot, and they called me and asked me to come back in. When I got in, she told me I'd had a stroke, and they needed to admit me to the ER. The office was at the hospital already, so she literally just walked me through like 2 doors, and I didn't even have to wait in the lobby. Spent 3 days being poked and prodded. I never really saw the big deal. It was just a stomachache and dancing lights. I'm doing a lot better now. I'm a receptionist in a GP practice, and we had a patient come in with breast pain. After examination, it was revealed the whole breast was cancerous. She'd hidden it from her husband and had dealt with the pain for 2 whole years because she was embarrassed. It was really sad and made the whole practice cry. I was the patient. I thought it was normal to have a heart rate range of 90-130 BPM. My whole life it's been that way, and none of my doctors had raised any red flags over it. One had me track my heart rate for a week, but nothing came of it. I knew the average was much lower than mine, but I thought that's just how my body worked. I am 23 years old and had a heart attack last month. Just got home from the ordeal yesterday. I was the patient. For years, I thought it was normal to get a UTI every once in a while. Every few years, I'd see blood in my urine. Go to a doctor, different doctors every time thanks to moving around a lot. Have the doctor say, "That's really weird. Guys don't get UTIs very often." Then shrug and give antibiotics. After a few days, it would always go away. Then last November I had the same thing happen, but with way more blood. Went to the urgent care, who immediately told me to go to the ER. Was admitted as soon as I got there, and 2 weeks later I was released, carrying with me a diagnosis for a kidney disease. It turns out that blood appeared every time the filters in my kidneys suffered severe damage. A very seriously heart problem. Exact cause I don't know. I work outpatient and we transferred to hospital, and I never heard about the follow-up. That would be someone else's job. That caused the patient to pass out frequently, sometimes daily, and be extremely winded up a single flight of stairs. Apparently just thought they were overweight and that it was normal. We had to explain that passing out for zero reason is not normal, that you should tell your doctor about it. The problem itself was sort of off and on. I mean, the cause obviously would always be there, but the symptoms came and went, so we didn't even know initially either, because our initial vitals all looked good. Then second set was very not good and none of the meds we had helped, so we ended up sending to hospital. Heart rate was extremely high and pretty sustained period of time, like 45-60 minutes with us. Not sure how long continued, so this patient was passing out because of a lack of oxygen. Heart was beating too fast to properly circulate and oxygenate blood. Apparently had been a problem as long as they could remember, so it was their normal. Never once came up to doctor. The worst part to me is that this had been happening since at least a teen, if not younger, so their parents never brought them to doc or mentioned while there. Patient story. Came off my bike during lunch break at a real slow walking pace after the wheel jammed on a gutter. Went over the bars and had a nasty fosh landing. My right wrist swelled up almost instantly, and so I isolated it thinking it was a probable collar's fracture, and then proceeded to walk the 1.5 kilometers back to the office. In cleats, with carbon fiber shoes that had no flex in the soles. Had to push the bike too. I was in a lot of pain, so took myself off to the Alfred for scans. The triage nurse assessed it and came to the same conclusion I did. Was given an ice pack and the doctor came around and ordered X-rays. I was in tears the entire time the films were being done, and I don't normally cry either. The only comfort from the radiology tech was there's a reason why you're crying, but I'll leave that to the doctor. Turns out I had sustained bilateral radial head fractures and broken my left wrist. The swelling in my right lower forearm was a reaction to the broken radial head. Spent 8 weeks in akimbo slings and then another 3 months of OT to teach my biceps how to bend my arms again, and even now I only have 90% bone strength in those joints. Click like M2 when doing chest presses and it hurts like a bee in the cold. Second time was self-diagnosed appendicitis. Had RLQ pain throughout the day, then felt really poorly by the evening. My brother took me down to the ED and the docs there came to the same conclusion. Had it out the next day. My brother thought I was hamming it up and went off to my parents' house for dinner after dropping me off with the protestation of if it turns out to be nothing, you can catch the train home. He came back later that night to be told I was actually spot on with the diagnosis. Boy did he feel crap after that. I was the patient. I have had serious pain when walking for as long as I can remember. I never spoke about it until one day in gym class at school when I was like 8 and was in so much pain I was crying. Turns out I have hydrocephalus. Not a doctor, but a former carer. My father felt a loud pop as I was helping him out of bed. This wasn't unusual and my father thought he just pulled something. However, the pain didn't subside for weeks. I dragged him to the GP and then to the hospital for a scan. The pop turned out to be the back of his rib totally separating as the bone was mostly powder. Lung cancer from smoking as a young adult had grown through the back of his lung and into his ribs and spine. He was in palliative care from then on. At least he got to say goodbye to his cat Tilly. I brought her into the hospital and he let her loaf on his chest with her bum in his face for one last time. Patient here. My pregnancy was really painful. I was the only woman in my family besides my mother, and she never got sick at all while pregnant. I thought it was normal that I couldn't stand straight or go farther than 10 feet from the bathroom, or that I spent days in the bathroom floor unable to keep anything down to the point where I would lose track of days. My fiance finally begged me to go to the ER because of all the pain I had. Turned out I had an acute UTI that was ready to spread to my kidneys. They told me if I waited any longer, I would have miscarried. The thought definitely makes me hold my baby tighter. Anesthesiologist in pain management here. I once had a self-referred patient come in for his first consult. The gentleman was clearly in a full-blown episode of acute pancreatitis and was close to stroking out. I had staff call EMS. Myself and nurses initiated emergency protocols. After getting him somewhat stabilized and pain nausea under control, I asked him why in the heck he hadn't gone to the ER. He said, "Oh, I've had these episodes before and thought it was normal, SMH." My best friend was a patient. She was being diagnosed with hernia and was set to have a surgery a year later or so. Because it wasn't that bad to have an emergency surgery, eventually decided to go to her home country because she felt she was mistreated. She was scheduled to have a pre-surgery checkup and have the surgery 2 weeks later. Well, when she went for the checkup, she got taken to the table without sleeping anesthesia and she was operated there and then. While she could see what's happening, she had some local one. Turned out she had a birth defect that ended up causing a massive cyst to grow. She was in a great danger. She had trouble walking and had to take a flight back the day after. She is doing much better now, but she is diagnosed to have another one on the other side. Coronavirus made it really hard to get another surgery done. My freshman year of college I had a really bad sore throat for a few days. I thought nothing of it and just took a crap ton of Tylenol until it went away. About a month later I noticed the joints in my fingers were extremely sore and I could barely make a fist. Next it was my wrists, elbows, knees, ankles, etc. It reached all my joints and muscles. It even hurt to lift my eyebrows or touch my scalp. I couldn't roll over in bed. I literally just lied in bed for days and cried. Finally my mom, who lived about 4 hours away, came and took me to the doctor, and he diagnosed me with something called post-streptococcal arthritis. Turns out I had strep throat a month prior, and because I didn't treat it with antibiotics, it spread through my body and caused arthritis in literally all of my joints. He prescribed a steroid and painkillers and said good luck. Man, I've had a lot of medical problems in my life, but this one was the worst by far. It took another 3 months for me to start feeling normal again and a full year to be completely back to normal. Now I catch strep throat extremely easily and I get it at least 4-5 times a year. If I don't get it treated within 2 days, the arthritis flares back up again. One night, when I was 16, I had a very sharp pain in my right side. I tossed and turned for a couple hours before getting up and knocking on my mom's bedroom door. A forbidden action. My mother swung the door open and snapped at me, "What did I want?" And when I explained my pain, she told me it was heartburn, to drink some milk and go back to bed. I drank the milk, tossed around my bed for a few more hours, and finally passed out from exhaustion. Next day, I felt fine. A couple months later, the pain was back and I again woke my mother. Same response. I eventually passed out from exhaustion again. The next time I felt the pain, I didn't bother going to my mother and just rode it out. This continued until I was 18. My parents were out of town one weekend and the pain came back worse than ever before, waking me from a dead sleep. After hours and hours of utter agony, hurting to move, hurting to lay still, I broke down and called my mother, leaving her a voicemail that I thought I was dying. I finally passed out as the sun began to rise. I was woken by my uncle banging on the front door and he took me to the doctor, who referred me to an ultrasound office, who had referred me to a surgeon. While I saw the first two the same day, the surgeon didn't have an availability until the end of the week. Didn't think anything of it as, once again, the pain was now gone. Mum begrudgingly takes me to the surgeon appointment, but I'm pretty sure she thought I was faking it since I'd been completely fine all week. I remember sitting in the office with the surgeon, just chatting while we waited for the nurse to bring him my ultrasound file. I'll never forget when she handed it to him. He opened the folder and the smile immediately fell from his face. Surgeon: "Did they give you any pain meds when you went to the doctor?" Me: "No, just some antibiotics." Why? S. To nurse: "Nancy, call my 2 o'clock and tell them we have to reschedule as I'll be in emergency surgery." To me: "You should have been sent to me last week. I'll meet you in the air." So yeah, my gallbladder had apparently been filled with stones since I was 16 and making more still for the last 2 years. The surgeon said he'd never seen anything like it, and my mother told me she overheard some nurses' questions how I was still walking. I guess mother didn't think that her mother having her gallbladder out at 16 and herself having it out at 18 was worth considering when I first woke her with pains in my side. I thought I just had heartburn. Doctor here. In med school I found a snack wrapper buried in the rolls of a really fat patient. This triggered endless stories from the experienced folks. My friend is a nurse, and one time a group of us were eating lunch and she decided to tell the story of how she was sponging off a really fat lady, and when she lifted a roll a whole bunch of cockroaches crawled out and you could see where they were, eating her skin. Not a doc, a nurse. Patient tells me it's completely normal for people to stop breathing for a bit when they've taken recreational drugs, and that we completely overreacted when we resuscitated them, intubated them, put them on a ventilator for a few days and notified their next of kin to come in because we were concerned about brain damage. According to them, just because they stopped breathing didn't mean they were going to die. This happened last month or so. I had been having this problem for about 2 months. I'd feel some pain or pressure in my chest, specifically in my left lung. If I'd get or bounced a bit or try to take a deep breath, I would normally need to burp, which made the pain disappear, so I thought that I had just swallowed some air or something had gone down the wrong pipe or whatever. Thought it was no big deal. Over time it got worse and worse. I would burp more, pain more frequently. Once or twice per week I would have a splitting pain which made me unable to turn on my left side until it was worse than ever. I couldn't sleep at all and was just tossing and turning. It was a total of 23 hours from when the pain first started and when I notified my mom I might have to go to the ER. Turns out I had a collapsed lung, not partially deflated, completely collapsed bad enough so it was pressing up against my heart and disrupting its rhythm. 2 operations later and 6 days in total I was okay. Through the glory of healthcare, the total hospital bill I had to pay was $25. Insurance paid it down from the original $60. Not an MD, but a radiation therapist here. If your wife starts to look like an ash grey skeleton with a pot belly and swollen extremities, then loses her mental faculties until almost catatonic, something is wrong. Don't wait several months. Ovarian tumors the size of slightly underinflated volleyballs, stuffed into her lower abdomen. The CT was textbook worthy. This is the first AskReddit post I have read every comment on. Honestly, such an interesting topic. If I wasn't broke, I would give you an award. Not a doctor, but I know my friend had always suffered from abdominal pain ever since he was a small child and was just used to it. One day when he was at the doctor, chest pain came into the conversation because of something completely unrelated, and he found out he had a bifid rib, essentially where a rib splits into 2. Afterwards, when he was talking to us, he was like, guys, is it not normal to just have chest pain? Luckily it's nothing lethal. Not a doctor. My buddy was doing a cable service call for a new customer. They were just chatting when the customer explained he had brain surgery recently and pulled off his hat to show the scars. Buddy said he gagged and called 911 immediately. His head was full of maggots and looked like meat left out too long. The customer was elderly and no relatives lived close by to help care for him. He thought the aches were from surgery and ignored it. Not the doc, but the patient. Someone gifted me a free set of adjustments with a chiropractor. I had always been skeptical, but decided to try it out since it was paid for. After the first adjustment, I told the doctor I didn't even realize my back was hurting. I just thought that's what it felt like after a certain age. Turns out constant throbbing back pain is not normal. Glad to be proven wrong, because it means I can do something about it. It was the first time I haven't had consistent back pain since I was 14. Sports messed my body up from a young age. I thought it was just part of puberty. He erased more than a decade's worth of pain in under 10 minutes. Not a doctor, but I have what's called Haglund's deformities in both my feet. Essentially, a bone is growing from the back of my heel through my Achilles tendon. Every time I would run, walk even, it would rip and tear a bit more and form scar tissue, called a bursa. Now I would only feel the pain after I had finished running, and the only time I was running was when I was playing rugby, so afterwards your whole body tends to hurt. Essentially, I had this for close to 20 years and there is a giant lump that protrudes from the back of my heel. I always thought this was normal as I never really looked at anyone else's feet in great detail. When I tore all the ligaments in my knee, the doctor saw the lumps and told me the only way to get rid of them would be cut through my Achilles, grind the bone away and reattach my Achilles. As I would have to learn to walk again, I essentially chose to just stop running. Patient here. I used to get periods so bad I would get dizzy and blackout regularly. Father told me that all periods are bad. OB-GYN told me I just didn't have a high pain threshold. 2 years later, my sister has the same symptoms and my mom gets very concerned because that's not normal. I just kinda said it's been happening to me for years, and my mother, sister, and I went to a different doc. Guess who has endometriosis? My mom is an RN and was just telling us about this lady she met while working in the emergency room a few years ago. This lady was morbidly overweight, diabetic, and was bedbound. She called 911 because she was worried about a smell coming from her bottom half. Again, she was morbidly obese and could not bend over far enough to see what was going on. Guess she gets seen by a doctor who checks her feet out, which were described as black as a chalkboard and almost completely dead, which was going to result in her losing her feet. When the doctor asked why she didn't have anyone checking in on her, she said that her kids came by once a week to bring her food, but she thought that tingling diabetic pain was normal. Feel bad for her. I remember saying once in college that if my hands hurt this much now, I'm gonna kill myself when I develop arthritis. Turns out, I already had it. I was recently diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and hypermobility. The hypermobility is not as severe as EDS. but it's notable. Just this year, I've dislocated a couple fingers, my wrist a few times, and both kneecaps. One was a full dislocation that had me on crutches for a few weeks and constantly subluxed. My doctor thinks the inflammation is new, but that I've been dislocating joints for years. I genuinely thought everyone was in as much constant pain as I was, and that they just managed it better and coped more efficiently. My eyesight deteriorated over a year and a half until my mom got mad at me for being difficult about my homework and I told her it was too blurry. Sad thing is, I was just entering puberty and getting acne, and that year I was the most confident in my appearance out of all my teenage years. I thought everyone couldn't see my acne unless they were 6 inches or less away. Not sure it fits here. I have a ridiculously high pain tolerance. Joke goes that I might lose a couple of limbs and it will take me a while to notice. I had some minor pain around my lower stomach and back. I didn't think of it much. I assumed it was some minor GI issues. Took paracetamol and didn't pay it much thought. This went for several days. Later that week, I suddenly started feeling seriously ill. Cold sweat, chills, fainting. Thought I might have somehow messed up the medications or something. In the end, it took just a couple of tests to figure out I had a severe kidney infection. And considering the severity, it had been going on for at least a month. I only felt minor discomfort for the few last days of it. Patient here. Stepped on a nail at 6 AM. Pulled my foot off the nail and went to school. Walked around all day in flip-flops. Sister made me go to the ER in the afternoon. Foot was all swelled up. Doc said that if I had just gone home like I wanted I would have died in my sleep from the infection. Spent 10 days in the hospital getting IV antibiotics every 4 hours. 5 days of that there were serious conversations about amputation. I'm the patient. Last October, after a wild night, I fell into some bushes by the side of the road. Lack of sobriety definitely a cause, though I wonder if I'd been pushed. Anyway, that wouldn't be so bad except for some reason. The sidewalk I'd been on was elevated by about 1-2 meters from the base of the bushes, and there was a concrete patch. Later I discovered it to be a manhole, right where I landed on my right shoulder. I got up, checked that I had full hand and finger mobility, and I could bend my elbows. I couldn't lift my arm above my head without some pain, but I figured I should be fine. Cleaned myself up, got home and went on with life as normal. The next 2 days it was a bit rough trying to lift my right arm, but after that it was more or less okay. I dismissed it as a muscle strain. 10 days later I pick up and carry my daughter and there's a searing pain at the shoulder where I had fallen. It still wasn't so bad, but since it hadn't gone away after 10 days, I should probably get an x-ray done. I had actually gone to see a doctor who asked me to get one done, but it slipped my mind. So fast forward to the x-ray scan, which was a couple of days after me carrying my daughter, and 12 days after the incident. I hear the x-ray guy say, "Oh," after the first one. Then I hear a muted phone call between him and the doctor I had seen earlier that day, not the same one from first appointment. When I was dressed and came out, x-ray technician bro told me he couldn't believe I'd been walking around for 12 days without pain. My clavicle collarbone was broken. On the right side, the bone was kind of tilted upwards, and it was totally separated from the left. By the time I got surgery to get the collarbone fixed, almost 4 weeks had passed since I fell. TLDR. I fell and broke my collarbone clavicle last October. Didn't realize it till 12 days later, and didn't get surgery until 4 weeks later. I have a reverse situation for you. During my training school for the military, while I would walk downstairs, sometimes pain would shoot down my legs, and they'd get kind of numb. One day, I was walking down the stairs, and lost all sensation in my legs, and just tumbled down the stairs. I naturally went to the hospital, and the military doctor told me it was a normal occurrence, and to be more careful. Not a doctor, I was a patient. I, 14, started getting an upset stomach one night, and it wasn't just another bellyache, maybe a little bit more intense, but I slept through it pretty well. The next morning my parents got me an appointment to the doctors to see if I was okay. We get through it all, but we had to wait at one point. Don't remember when, like before we went to the checkup, after, etc. And I told my mom we should just go home. It's probably nothing. Next thing I know, I need surgery. When talking to the doctor before the surgery, he explained that my appendix had burst and told me I had a very high tolerance to pain and that he was surprised I slept through it. Afterwards, he also explained to me that if I didn't have surgery when I did, I would have died around 1-3 days later. I can see now why a lot of people think that not feeling pain won't be good. Patient. I was rushed to the OR after frequent blackouts, loss of time, and sudden onset fatigue. I worked a physical labor job and attended college after my shift, so I didn't think anything about the fatigue and the blackouts. Loss of time I thought was just my brain giving me a fast forward through mind-numbing tasks. Typically I would have the blackouts while driving because my commute to work was about 45 minutes and my school was about an hour away from my work. I would get on the highway, blink, and I'm pulling into the parking lot with 45 minutes having passed in an instant. I told my girlfriend about this and she told me something was wrong, but being a dumb 19-year-old I thought my brain was giving me a fast forward through boring crap. It wasn't until I was at work stacking chairs when I had an empty cart, put a chair on it, turned around to pick up another chair, then turned back and the cart was full. When I saw the full cart, it was like someone hit me in the back of the head and I instantly felt like I hadn't slept in days. I ended up sitting down and one of my co-workers noticed I was white as a ghost. The guy in charge forced me to go to the hospital. Even through my insistence I was fine. Once I got to the hospital and got brain scanned done, it turned out I was having mild seizures caused by a lack of sleep. When I told the doctor about my commute blackouts, he looked like he nearly crap himself. He told me he has no idea how I didn't crash and the sudden fatigue was basically my body both recovering from seizures as well as realizing how tired I actually was. He basically told me to find a new job and get more sleep. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.